Now, Trump's grim assessment came as US-led peace talks on ending the more than 3-year-old conflict in Ukraine have stalled, and after Washington paused some weapons shipments to Kyiv. In Moscow, the Kremlin said the call between Putin and Trump lasted nearly an hour, and that Putin insisted that he would not give up on Russian goals in the conflict with Ukraine.
Наш президент также сказал, что Россия будет добиваться поставленных целей, то есть устранения всем известных первопричин, приведших к нынешнему положению дел, к нынешней острой конфронтации. И от этих целей Россия не отступится.
Well, Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov has said that Trump reiterated his proposal for a swift ceasefire in Ukraine, while Putin emphasized on resolving the conflict through political negotiations.
Now, Moscow has long described its goals in Ukraine as getting rid of the root causes of the conflict, demanding that Kyiv give up its NATO ambitions and recognize Russia's territorial gains.
Well, the conversation between Trump and Putin came days after Washington announced a decision to pause some weapons shipment in a blow to Kiev, which has been reliant on Western military support.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was visiting ally Denmark on Thursday to meet leading European Union officials. Zelensky told EU allies in Denmark that doubts over US military aid reinforced the need for greater cooperation with Brussels and NATO. Zelensky said that he expects to have a telephone conversation with Trump, maybe tomorrow or in the next few days.
What about our bilateral relation with the United States and this support? So I hope that maybe tomorrow or in close days, these days, I will speak about it with the President Trump.
Meanwhile, EU chief Ursula von der Leyen has said that Europe must beef up its aid to Ukraine following Washington's decision to pause some weapons shipment.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said Europe is not complete without Ukraine as she vowed to use Denmark's time leading the EU's rotating presidency to push for Ukraine joining the Union.
Well, furthermore, German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful is, after the meeting with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi for a bilateral meeting in Berlin, called on China to use its influence on Russia to help end the war in Ukraine.
We must prevent Russia from waging this war with the supply of crucial war goods. I emphasized once again how important it is for China to do everything possible to ensure that such goods do not reach Russia from the People's Republic and ultimately support this war.
Now, for more on this, we're being joined by John Ayres from Washington, D.C. He's a Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, let's begin with Trump's assessment. We know that he's usually given a very optimistic assessment of where things stand when it comes to the war between Russia and Ukraine. He did in fact say that he would have this war ended in 24 hours, it then extended to 100 days. And now comes this very bleak assessment. If Trump is saying so, do you think there is any hope of a future negotiation or ceasefire?
Well, ending wars is always a lot more difficult than starting. Peace process takes time and it takes willing participants. And right now, neither Ukraine nor Russia is in a position where it is realized its war goals. And so neither one feels that there is much to be gained by a rapid peace negotiation at this point. So the peace process is going to be difficult. It is going to require a great deal of patience. It's going to require painstaking negotiation. And it's simply not a case where you can end the war in one day, as President Trump famously promised. So it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to take a lot of patience and care. And that seems to be what is not coming out of the Trump administration at this point.
Right, and Mr. Irath, having said that, we know that the talks occur against the backdrop of the unsuccessful U.S. efforts to broker a ceasefire with Ukraine. And now, despite Trump's peace initiatives, the Kremlin statement didn't indicate any change in Russia's stance. And it notably, Putin, we know that he's known for keeping the world leaders waiting. So now, having said all of that, how do we make sense of the situation that's unfolding before us? And how long will this waiting game going to last?
Well, I noticed two other very interesting developments this week. One was that Russia stepped up its attacks on Ukrainian forces and cities. Additional bombings, additional attacks on the ground. This is very typical for Russia in a pattern when it has diplomatic contacts with the West. It's trying to send a message that it's willing to continue fighting the war. This is not a sign of strength, but of weakness. They're trying to send the message that the war is going to continue. They're trying to put pressure on the West to try to force Ukraine into making peace. The other is that there was an announcement that more North Koreans could be coming to fight Russia's war for them. Again, this is a sign of weakness, but a signal that the Russian side is willing to continue fighting the war and that they have the means to continue fighting the war. So all of this signaling is that war is going to continue to go on longer, that the means to continue fighting it are there, and that Ukraine and its supporters should be eager to make peace as soon as possible.
Right, Mr. Eros, of course, there's also the issue of arms supplies to Ukraine, something that it desperately needs. From what it appears, Putin may be biding his time here. And, of course, they've made it clear that the Russian president said that he would stick to achieving all of Russia's goals. What's your assessment of what Russia's goals right now are? We know it is that it wants Ukraine to recognize its territorial gains, but it's not going to stop there, is it?
Russia's long-term goals are that the Ukrainian government should be replaced by one that is friendly to Russia, that will follow Russia's lead on its foreign policy. I think that as a short-term goal, Russia would be content with a end to the war that recognized the territorial gains, and then would take another war to replace the Ukrainian government. I think they will play a long game and be patient on that particular one. But right now, Russia got into a war that it didn't want. They expected a quick and easy victory. They did not get that, and are trying to fight a longer, ultimately very unsuccessful, very costly war. And they're trying to come out of it with something positive that they can show for the effort and for the tremendous losses they have suffered. Russia is an authoritarian state. They depend on the image of success to perpetuate that authoritarian government, and they need some success to continue. That's what is important to them, to be able to show some success coming out of the war.
Right, Mr. Urath, and we also know that some crucial topics were omitted during this conversation, right? We know that the discussion on the U.S. To halt certain weapon shipments to Ukraine, which is a major concern for Ukrainian allies, was also skipped during this conversation. And additionally, there was also no mention of a potential face-to-face between the two leaders. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty. Now, what is your assessment of it, and how do we sift through this arena of uncertainty, and what to expect going forward?
We don't know for certain that these items were discussed or not discussed. It just was not part of the reporting that we had on the conversation. I think it was likely that there was some discussion of U.S. assistance to Ukraine. And what we know about that is that there are certain things that the shipments have been halted on. We know that there are other things that the shipments are continuing on. And the halt is perhaps temporary in nature. That's going to be discussed in Washington in the coming days and weeks, and we might see a resumption, perhaps tied to Russia's reluctance to engage in a real process toward ending the war. That's going to be something that will be much discussed. There's a lot of pressure from Congress to resume some of the shipments, so I think there's going to be some selective discussion of that in the coming weeks.
All right, Mr. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA with your insights and your perspective on this.
Thank you very much for having me on.
The American President Donald Trump appears to rebuff Vladimir Putin's offer to mediate in the Iran-Israel war, saying that the Russian president should actually end his own war in Ukraine first. Now, Trump's latest statement appears to be a shift in his approach towards Moscow's involvement in nuclear talks with Iran. Now, Trump issued a statement on Iran, telling Iran's allies that his patience has come to its tail end and that it is too late to now come to the negotiating table. Listen.
You know, Russia, Ukraine is so stupid. Would have never happened if I was president. You guys agree with that, right? Would have never happened if I was president. Putin would have never done it. And I spoke to him yesterday, and I said, you know, he actually offered to help mediate. I said, do me a favor. Mediate your own. Let's mediate Russia first, okay? I said, Vladimir, let's mediate Russia first. You can worry about this later.
Now, earlier on Sunday, Donald Trump and Putin, remember, held a phone call speaking about the escalating war in West Asia. The Russian presidential aide informed about Trump's optimism that Iran could agree to a nuclear deal and also the possibility of Russia helping Washington in the process. In his interview to ABC News, Trump had said that he was open to Russia serving as a mediator. It's taken just 3 days for the American president to do a complete U-turn in his stand both on Iran and also on the possibility of Vladimir Putin as a mediator. And it comes across again as whimsical Donald Trump, with no decision being taken either way. All right, now joining us over the phone line, we've got our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's been tracking all the developments very closely for us. Susan, this is a bit of a back and forth by the American president. He wants to get involved as a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine war, but he's not very pleased with the possibility of Vladimir Putin mediating for some kind of a solution between Iran and Israel, which is backed by the United States.
Yes. Well, regarding Russia and Ukraine, the United States was, as you mentioned, directly arming Ukraine and continues to arm Ukraine. And it was Ukraine that asked the United States to be a mediator between itself and Russia. The difference here is Russia is not a party to the conflict between Israel and Iran, and neither is the United States. So there's sort of a geopolitical and geostrategic difference between the two. But nonetheless, it appears that, you know, if there was mediation needing to be involved, it would have been between Israel and Iran, because the United States is not a party to this conflict. Now, regarding the Iran nuclear deal, we can talk about that. I think that's where Vladimir Putin could have sort of brought the two sides closer together, like Oman has, for example, in the past. And other countries, like Qatar, has offered to mediate. But it appears that the time for negotiation, at least from the view of Washington, that timeline was getting very small. And at this point, it doesn't seem to be like an appetite for any kind of negotiated settlement. And I think it was interesting that President Trump today said that what we saw 5 days ago, 6 days ago when the war started is very different than what we see right now, and things seem to be very different. So nonetheless, yes, It appears that as the ambassador to Russia told me yesterday, he said, we tried to mediate. There's just not an appetite for any kind of mediation.
Interesting. No appetite for mediation. But very quickly, Susan, the American president is now demanding for an unconditional surrender by Iran. The Iranian supreme leader, in an address to the nation a little while back, has said that there is no circumstance under which the Iranian nation will surrender. Has there been an American reaction to this?
Yes, President Trump was actually asked that by reporters. I'm glad you asked. He had 2 words: good luck to the Iranian leader. So, you know, we'll see what happens.
Right. A very typical American response there. Good luck. Thank you very much indeed, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those updates then.
Now, for more on this, we're being joined by John Ayres from Washington, D.C. He's a Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, let's begin with Trump's assessment. We know that he's usually given a very optimistic assessment of where things stand when it comes to the war between Russia and Ukraine. He did, in fact, say that he would have this war ended in 24 hours, it then extended to 100 days. And now comes this very bleak assessment. If Trump is saying so, do you think there is any hope of a future negotiation or ceasefire?
Well, ending wars is always a lot more difficult than starting. Peace process takes time, and it takes willing participants. And right now, neither Ukraine nor Russia is in a position where it is realized its war goals. And so neither one feels that there is much to be gained by by a rapid peace negotiation at this point. So the peace process is going to be difficult. It is going to require a great deal of patience. It's going to require painstaking negotiation. And it's simply not a case where you can end the war in one day, as President Trump famously promised. So it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of patience and care. And that seems to be what is not coming out of the Trump administration at this point.
Right, and Mr. Irath, having said that, we know that the talks occur against the backdrop of the unsuccessful U.S. efforts to broker a ceasefire with Ukraine. And now, despite Trump's peace initiatives, the Kremlin statement didn't indicate any change.